Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Cluster in a Box in 2013. I'm John Lovall, Principal Program Manager in the Windows Server Division at Microsoft. And I'm here to tell you a big update about the kinds of things that have been happening with Cluster in a Box, what it's about, where it's been going, the kinds of things that you've been asking for, and hopefully a whole lot of answers. One of the things that I want to point out is you might notice this is a little bit different probably than a lot of the sessions you've been attending. First off, you're watching me on this camera. Notice I have a video here. That's because I wanted to be able to let everybody see some of the close-up hardware we have, and that's the other difference you'll probably notice, is that up here on the table is some actual hardware, and next to the table in a carrying case. This is a little bit different. We know that a lot of you guys are interested in hardware. In fact, I imagine all of you went to the keynote session on Monday. And I think you'll agree, amazing story, 2 hours of the entire story about the Cloud OS, what Microsoft is doing, all the different parts we're integrating. What you may have walked away with wondering was, but hold it, what about hardware that we would normally be buying? Is Microsoft thinking that we're all just jumping into the cloud? And I'm here to tell you that no, we're also realizing that there's a lot of hardware that's running in the world outside of the cloud and will continue to be. In fact, let me just quick poll. How many of you here, raise your hand, are planning to buy some new hardware in the next year? Just about everybody. And I bet anybody that didn't raise their hand is probably just worried if their budget's going to get approved. So that's the deal. The real world says that there's a lot of hardware in the world. Availability is a huge ask from the customer base. And so this session is going to tell you about what we've been doing at Microsoft and Windows Server to address that need. And indeed, I think you'll see that we can in fact say that it's beyond availability, that really this is sort of where we think the future of on-premise servers is actually going. So with that, let's switch back over to the slides and talk about a little bit about what we're doing. So I'm going to tell you what is Cluster in a Box, background about the strategy, why we did this in the first place, tell you a little bit about then from there what's been happening over the past year since we introduced the concept and actually the initial prototype and rollouts last year. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the real world. So one of the biggest asks that we've had has been, hey, what about customer usage? What's available out there? So I've got some interesting material to share with you about customers and how they're using it, as well as how some of the partners are focusing on solutions directly for customers. And then something on the end that actually I couldn't put in the abstract because we have the embargo, but I'm actually going to tell you a little bit about R2 and some new stuff that's coming your way that will influence Cluster in a Box. So hopefully you'll get the entire story here and actually see what you can do to add availability to your business. So let's get going. First, the Cluster in a Box story. You see the subtitle there, the volume platform for availability. And that really is the tagline for what this is all about. So when we was at TechEd last year, what we did is we rolled out basically the concept. And we introduced why we had to work with the industry to bring new hardware, what this new hardware was, and then also a number of the partners that were there. So how many of you actually remember the Cluster in a Box sessions or attended it or heard about that in the last year or so? Okay, a good number. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through to tell the story. So for everyone here that hasn't been, I'll catch you up on kind of what this is all about. For those of you that have already been plugged in, hang on. There'll be plenty of new stuff coming in the coming sections, I promise you. So overall, the basic story was, as you can see here in this slide, that there was a huge demand for continuous availability, and I'll talk more about what we mean by that. There was a huge amount of work done in the OS on the Windows Server side, but as you know, you don't just buy Windows Server, you buy it and run it on some hardware. And so the issue was, all of the hardware that was available for high availability was really not in the right part of the market. The industry had grown up in a different path. So we had to work on something, and we basically created the Cluster in a Box program to work with the industry to bring you the solutions you could actually buy and deploy. So that's the story in a nutshell. But let's jump back to the beginning, go back to last year when we first rolled out Windows Server 2012. I'll do it manually. There we are. with Windows Server 2012, as you remember, a lot of you were attending TechEd last year, or if you've been paying attention to the press, there was an amazing cavalcade of features, a huge generational delivery of things from Microsoft. And as you can see here, the feedback was enormous when we brought it initially to the analysts and to market. And I think over the last year, it's continued to roll. If you guys have actually been working to deploy it, I've been hearing some great things from people. I think a lot of you agree. It's an amazing release. One of the things I like to talk about is the one feature that really was not part of the release, but was probably one of the more fundamental deliverables of Windows Server 2012 was the way we went about doing it. The typical release process for Windows Server for years had been that we have a lot of different technology teams at Microsoft. Each of those technology teams are experts in their areas. Previously, what we do is let each of those teams plot out the future of their technology, bring the features to development that will make it happen. And then once all that happens and hits, we stand back and take a look and see, well, okay, how do you use this? What does it all add up to? It's a great way to keep ahead of the technology. It's a real lousy way to give complete solutions to customers. So what happened with Windows Server 2012 was we basically turned the whole thing upside down and instead started with what you might think would make a lot of sense. What are customers asking for? What do we think customers need? And if we figure that out, how do we get it to them? What's the right solution that will realize real solutions? So that process was long, more than a year of primary research, thousands of conversations with customers like yourself, all that data discussed and boiled down through a long process to figure out what's the essence of it, what is it telling us. And so one of the key takeaways we had from all of that data and all of that feedback was that availability, high availability, and here we call it continuous, and I'll explain why in a second, was not just something people said, yes, it's better to be available than not available, sure, good. It actually came across much different than that, actually much stronger than that. The feedback we got was that availability was critical, table stakes, needed in every business from large to small around the world. It was clear feedback that availability was a key need from the customer base. So something had changed. Like I said, every feature that you ask about will have some level of interest, but something changed about availability that made it rise to the top. And indeed, it became one of the 5 key investment areas for the entire Windows Server 2012 release. And just to put that in perspective, we have thousands of people working on a release. So when we choose to emphasize something and make an investment out of it, there's a lot at stake. We're talking about pulling hundreds of engineers, equivalent numbers of program managers and tests. This is a large investment. So we don't take these things lightly. We did look a little bit more into it as to, well, why now? Why availability rising to the top now? Do we believe it? So we did go back and dig a little bit further, and we found some things that actually seemed to make a lot of sense. First was the rise of virtualization. And not just the technology of virtualization or the interests in virtualization, but actually the turning of the corner to where people were now looking at virtualization as something to deploy, something to actually do. So we were seeing that people realized this pretty much is the way to go. But they were also smart enough, you're also smart enough to realize that while that's a great way to get just maximum advantage of your hardware, you can run many, many workloads on a single system. Now, however, the downside is when a single system goes down or needs maintenance, you now have the capability of losing your entire operation. Not just a few workloads, but indeed enough workload to, say, drive an entire department, an entire branch office, or indeed an entire business. So the upside was, great, wonderful technology, but how do I actually make this work? And it needs to be available so I can get my job done, so I can run my business. That was one. The second one was storage. Storage seems to show up everywhere, but the key thing here was storage is great. If you've seen all the exponential curves about the growth, people are now actually frequently talking in exabytes. The storage growth is real, and the technology behind it is real as well. It's not only getting faster with solid state, but it's getting larger. And the size of data drives that you can put into a single server system now is tens of terabytes easily much larger than that without much planning. And that's great. It's a huge resource. It's a wonderful new way to look at how you can drive your business with data. The downside is you lose one box and you lose tens of terabytes, possibly enough data to drive your entire business. So availability and access to your data was another key driving point that customers also saw was critical. And then there was a third point that actually didn't rise immediately at the time, but as over the last few years and with the rise of the cloud and people understanding what the cloud means, there's another aspect of this. If you've been looking at the way people talk about cloud and the kinds of features that are being offered as critical to what people want, availability surfaces frequently. People look to the cloud that the belief is that, okay, once it works and once we work out the kinks, and I believe that this is another corner that's turning, it's turning from interesting approaches to actual plans for deployment. One of the promises of the cloud is that it is up, it's backed up, it's available. And so there's been a shift now to thinking in terms of the systems that you have on your on-premise should match that same profile. So if you're going to depend and you're going to build a business around availability that is provided by a cloud deployment, really the hardware on your premises should match that same promise. So there's another growing aspect of saying, okay, there will be the cloud and there will be a lot of workloads moving to it. At the same time, there'll be a whole lot of hardware being deployed in small businesses, medium, and even large. And the key thing that we see is that those deployments are going to increasingly need to be highly available. In fact, one way to look at this technology is as technologies are created and get adopted, there's sort of a common path. At first, they're very special. They require a lot of special handling. Custom products come out. You have to have a lot of expertise to understand it and even to use it, even to know what to buy. If you think back to the 80s, multiprocessing was in that point. The number of CPUs and the technology needed to use them was a bit of an art. But eventually, as we crept into the 90s, and even today, people just assume that it works. In fact, all people want to know today are how many sockets, how many cores. Nobody even thinks about what it takes to actually get efficient usage, for the most part, out of all that hardware. A similar thing happened in the 90s, early 90s, before the explosion on the internet. Networking was a bit of an art. A lot of systems needed special care. If you wanted to scale it all, you really had to know what you were doing to put together a configuration. Today, most people assume, and it's really true, that networking basically works. That you might need to have to worry about scale as the internet keeps exploding, but it's another technology that's fundamentally disappeared. We think availability is in that same mode. If you think about where we've been with previous availability systems, these have been difficult to use, complex, difficult to purchase, and expensive to maintain. So what we're thinking about now is that this is now the time where this technology is going to move, and it's going to become another assumed characteristic of any system you buy. So, great vision, all makes sense. What's the problem? So, the problem was, and is in some sense, although I think it's actually turning the corner this year, is that the high availability market had grown for the last decade or more around high-end systems. If you look at this chart, what it shows is, in the blue, basically the previous choices you had to deploy servers. On the low end, on the left side of the screen, you'll see single-node servers. These are your simplest, most well-understood boxes. Some people call them commodity. I call them volume. But easy to deploy. You don't need a significant amount of expertise. They're low. If you look at the bottom axis, that's both cost as well as expertise. It's low on that end. Any business can afford to buy one. However, if you wanted availability, you really then jumped to the right side of the screen. And you can see there the traditional, highly available systems. And in fact, the industry growing around them had a great number of features. You can build scale-out clustering with amazing amounts of technology, typically supported by SANs with Fibre Channel or iSCSI storage. But the problem is the positioning on the lower axis. It's expensive. It takes expertise. And not only expertise to run it, but even to buy it. A lot of times if you go to a site where you're buying servers and you want to buy the high availability version, you might be able to do it, but oftentimes it's not even clear what hardware will work, what version of the operating system you need to purchase, and then heaven help you when you get all the pieces exactly how to put it together. This is a consulting gig. So what we found was that as the industry had grown around that impression of what high availability was, it lined up in a big way, not just a small, okay, this is just a few problems to fix, but it was deep. Because not only was the product designed that way, the marketing, the divisions that these were produced in the businesses were all designed around high end. In fact, customer expectations were also set. Availability was something for high-end niche businesses that really needed it. Without that, you really couldn't afford it, you couldn't understand it. So what we had in front of us was a problem to say what we really need is this orange box in the middle. And you can see what it does is it moves it back over to the left in terms of cost and expertise. But also, if you look at the vertical axis now, it's not everything that you were getting before in the enterprise high availability market. The key thing to bringing out a volume product, one of the key things, is that you understand how to limit it. Because it's not only really a matter of cost of, say, the hardware and the size of it. It affects everything. It affects the support, it affects the qualification, even the design of the components, what you have to design to. All of them scale in a big way with the level of features and support you need. So the whole product had to come down, and we had to understand what that meant. The other thing that you'll notice is that a volume product isn't just an expensive product made cheaper. Many examples of this in the industry, but a key thing about this is that there's a fundamental change in the nature of it, and that is all about usability. It has to be simple. It has to be something where, as I was saying before, in some sense, the complexity disappears. People know how to buy single servers. People don't really know how to buy high availability systems for the most part. What we needed was a system that people that knew how to buy single servers without much more expertise than that, without really a significant amount of budget than that, maybe a little bit more, could go to wherever they could find a server and buy the highly available one. And that's been our vision. If we truly want availability available, we have to make sure that those criteria are met. So with that being the marketing problem, the question is, great, what do we build? What did we actually talk to the industry about creating? And one of the key things about it is what's, in some sense, not shown on this slide. This is not a specification for a particular motherboard inside a certain chassis with certain configurations and connections. This actually is different. This is a functional goal. Because what we wanted was not a single line of availability servers that would accomplish a specific goal for this year or next year. What we wanted was to turn the entire approach to servers. So we went at it by specifying what we desired as the end result. So 3 key areas. Clearly the first, availability. The system has to stay up. It has to survive a failure of the critical components and their repair. Now, sometimes you get the question, well, what does that mean? Are we talking about dedicated, high-end, fault-tolerant systems? And the answer there is no. What we're talking about is, this goes to the idea of how do you create a volume product. What we need is the best effort that the system creator can do to survive single component failures and their repair. So we left that open as far as what a partner would do, how they would design the box. We have a lot of ideas. We've done a lot of close work to understand what the goals were. But in the general, it's a promise that through the design is delivered by each of the partners in their own way. Second, simplicity. Again, volume products are not the same as their high-end brethren, just simply reduced in price. These had to be something that was as close as possible, pre-configured, pre-wired, something that could simply be deployed as readily as a customer would today deploy a single server. Much easier said than done. How many of you have ever configured Windows clustering for more than 5 years? Who here has been working with that? Everyone look at these people. They deserve your respect. So clustering, one of the things about it, it's a great technology. Historically, one of the ongoing challenges has been the complexity of setting it up and configuring and managing it. A lot of work has already gone into it. Actually, what most people don't realize is that 2012 wasn't the first release that addressed the complexities of clustering. It's been coming for a while. Even in Windows Storage Server 2008 R2, we introduced a simple out-of-the-box wizard that lets you configure a 2-node cluster in under 30 minutes. So we've been chipping away at this, but we realize that it's not simply a matter of the software configuration. It's also the hardware itself. As many mistakes are made from usability studies that we've done, configuring the hardware, putting a cable in the wrong socket, as you would make actually clicking a box and checking the right options as you're going through the software config. And the problem is, once you make the cable problem happen, you've inserted the networking cable in the wrong NIC so that your heartbeat won't be discovered. We found as often it takes just as long to find the problem as it did to set it up in the first place. Time and money and complexity. So a big part of our message was, yep, it's great, you can actually assemble systems using discrete servers, and you can do your best to document for the customer exactly how to cable it, but the best approach is if you can combine them all so when it arrives, it is in fact pre-wired, pre-configured, so that it can be turned on and actually usable in under 30 minutes. So that was the goal of simplicity. Finally, flexibility. To realize the vision that wherever you can buy a server, you'll be able to buy a highly available one, we had to make sure that this was not a special purpose built box. You had to have the same kind of choices in when you buy a server today when you buy a highly available one. And this means choices in expansion, for disk, in adapter card expansion with available PCIe slots. We also introduced the push for the concept that say, hey, this is a new market. We're actually talking about small businesses, branch offices that may not have equipment rooms or maybe don't want to continue to have to maintain their closet. If you can make this system have acoustics and power needs that match just a simple office, you could open up the market even further. So these three things together was what we worked with the industry to say, what can be done? What can be built together to satisfy these? And I think what you'll see is here that there's been a lot of work that's been happening. So we did go one step beyond these recommendations. And so in the conversations we have with the partners, a common issue that comes up is, okay, great. We understand the basic concept of the chassis, the goals for availability. What do we put in it? What CPU, what memory, what NICs, what disks actually should go inside? And what we found was that these configurations actually fairly well followed a couple of different scenarios. One was highly available storage, and the other one was a general purpose server, a Hyper-V server, a Hyper-V appliance for running general office workloads. So two separate sets, and what we do is you'll see here, some of them are the same, but there are some differences. CPU. Storage typically is not intensely CPU heavy. So if you're putting together a configuration, same chassis, same motherboard, but you want to sell it as a purpose-built high availability storage server, you can actually lighten the cost by lightening the CPU. Same for memory. Storage typically is not a heavily memory-intensive operation. However, there are some considerations. For example, if it's a heavy dedupe workload, that is one aspect that can take CPU and memory in the system. So we gave some recommendations listed here in more detail about exactly how to think about that. For networking and storage, interesting thing is that's where you want performance. So having high-end NICs, NICs that can support RDMA, these things are all something that a high-end, high-availability storage server can take advantage of. Now, on the other side, virtual appliance is a little bit different. There, what you're really worrying about is how many virtual workloads can you run. For example, can you run everything needed to support a branch office or a small business? So for a lot of that, it becomes more about how many guest VMs can you put in a box. And that becomes more about cores and memory. So there, and in fact, a lot of the usage there happens inside the box. So if you have truly everything in a box, a business or a branch, and everything you're running inside that box, a lot of times your networking external needs are not extreme. So you can get away with a lower end NIC. Even 1 gig E connectivity to your ISP can be good enough for that box. So it changes the way you look at how to configure a system or even sell it or even buy it as to how you would look at these components. So with these kind of guidelines, we then basically talk to everybody. And we're Microsoft, so we can do that. And one of the fun things about this job is we actually get to work with an amazing array, not only of customers like yourself, but also the partners that create the systems that you buy. And so told the story, worked with everyone. And so What I'd like to tell you now is what's become of that. One of the most frequent questions I received after we told the story of the cluster in a box last year was, typically we start this way. Are you the guy that talked about cluster in a box? Yes, thanks. Great, I think it's a great concept. Where do I get one? And so what we had to realize was that, okay, the story had started. We had crossed the start line last year. We had some momentum built, but really where we started this time last year was we had some initial products under development. In fact, last year, in place of this table with finished products, we had if you were there, you might remember we had an entire rack of prototype equipment that we brought just to be able to show everybody that this equipment was real. But bottom line, it was prototypes under development. It wasn't actual products. Another aspect of it was a clustered RAID controller. Under development, we were partnering with LSI. Actually, on a side on that, one of the key aspects of bringing a volume solution, giving the same choices as regular servers, was bringing back some of the choices of storage. So what we realized was that storage solutions for high availability had grown up in the same way the rest of the market had, the high end. What we needed to do was bring back to clustering the ability to use a software storage solution, a standard hardware RAID storage solution. So we did our part in the OS to bring back a modern virtualized software resource that could be used for clustering. That's storage spaces. And we also then partnered with LSI, market leader in RAID, bringing a volume solution to a clustered market makes a lot of sense. The solution you're familiar with coming out in a clustered version. Exactly the kind of strategy we wanted in general for these products. So we announced a partnership. It was in progress. We announced we were working with a lot of different partners, a lot of names on the screen. So, has anything happened since then? Is anything really available? Well, let me tell you, work has continued. Since last TechEd, we've continued to work with our partners, and there's been a number of interesting product launches. So you can see here some of the work that's been going on. Fujitsu announced the system at CeBIT earlier this year. You can see yours truly helping Quanta out with some of their messaging as they were bringing their system to release earlier this year. And some of you might actually know the person in the bottom picture. He's in our team, Scott Johnson. He's kind of our tireless ambassador for Windows Storage Server. And here's a picture of him helping HP release their Windows Server 2012, Windows Storage Server 2012 version of their StoreEasy product in Europe. So work has continued, but great. Can you actually show me something that you can buy? That's the question. And I think I can. Quanta, last year, status, under development, working closely with them to bring something to market. Status this year, released. Quanta Mesos CB220, Windows Storage Server hardware, is now available from Quanta. This is a 2U system with 12 disk drives, dual socket motherboards, Sandy Bridge CPUs, all integrated inside a single chassis. HP had their previous piece of hardware released on 2008 R2. As of December last year, released. Windows Storage Server 2012 is now running on their box. This is an interesting system. If you notice, one of the key aspects of this is that almost all the key components have front panel access. So not only the storage blades as well as their boot drives, but that box on the left side of the system is actually a tray that you can pull out while it's operational to change out drives. So innovation, it's a great story that matches the kinds of things you would expect from this particular partner, the kinds of hardware they would bring out. Fujitsu had a booth last year at TechEd that they were showing their prototype system. Last year, status now, released. This is a 2U 12-drive cluster in a box. It actually released on storage spaces. So this is a box that actually is using SAS controllers with direct attached SAS drives in the box. It has SAS expanders connected so that you can actually run this based on Windows Storage Server 2012. Is that it? No. There's more. If I was Jeff Woolsey, I would say something like, I'm just getting started. So Fujitsu also released their other cluster in a box. The interesting thing about actually this system was this piece of hardware on the bottom was something that was already out in the market prior to Windows Server 2012. What happened was they realized that they had a storage blade they could insert that connected through a set of SAS expanders that could be distributed to all the nodes in the box. So with this system, they were then able to qualify it with Windows Server 2012 using storage spaces as the storage subsystem and come out with a fully delivered data center in a box completely with Windows Server 2012 as basically the full feature set. At the same time, they released a 2U version of this. Smaller overall, it's meant to be more of an entry system from their point of view. Both of these servers support not only Windows Storage Server, but also Windows Server, so they can support a Hyper-V appliance workload. WeWin completed their box. They're more of a traditional ODM, so their system is available for evaluation. But basically, they've completed all the work to take it to final release. They're going to be working, continuing to release it with actually the LSI Synchro product, which I'll talk a little bit more in a second. So those are the products that this is sort of, I now caught you up to the work that's happened over the last 12 months. But then you can ask, okay, great, people have finished what they said they would do. Is there anything new coming? Yes. So, at TechEd, there are a number of systems actually being announced, brand new this week, that are being brought to market. So here's a couple in the category of flash storage. So Violin, last year, their status was a technology demonstration showing that they could run Windows Server on the controllers of their box. Interesting, kind of cool to see it kind of working. Status today, announcing Windows Storage Server-based product coming on their platform. STech, last year, actually, was really working with us as a solid-state drive vendor, partner. Status this year, they're announcing on the floor at TechEd a system, an S3000 system running Windows Storage Server. High availability, all SSDs as their version of Flash. So purpose-built, I'll say a little bit more about kind of this area in a little bit. Is that it? No. We have some more. So XIO is announcing today at the show, actually this week, their cluster in a box based on their integrated storage technology. What's interesting about this one is it actually uses fiber channel connections to connect to their storage. Is that a problem? Does that not work with our strategy of direct attached? It's fine. The key thing, again, about these solutions is not the particular technology. It's more about the experience of purchasing, deploying, and managing. So in this case, we have an integrated set of components, all of which come pre-configured so that when you buy it, it's up and running quickly. So what they were able to do is take their interesting storage technology. They have a kind of an advanced sealed storage that allows them to support enterprise workloads with very, very low total cost of ownership, couple it with some server systems running Windows Storage Server, and end up with a robust storage server with SMB3 support, NFS, iSCSI, etc. So it's an interesting approach, and it again kind of follows what we like to see, which is the technology that's out there just becoming at you and available as in these kinds of products. Daedon, on their booth on the show floor, came out with two products they're announcing this week. Actually, there are two different versions. One, the large one actually, is probably the highest density storage cluster in a box that's come to market. It supports up to 70 drives in one chassis, and they're actually using storage spaces to support this. It's kind of a cool thing. They have they have 4 SAS expanders in the box that are all cross-connected to support dual path connection to all 70 drives in the single chassis. The small one on top is using the LSI Synchro technology. So this is a different kind of choice, a different model, but with 2 systems coming out, they've now got an interesting family of systems that you can take a look at. So great. A few products being announced. Is that it? No, there is more. So in addition to those individual products, we have the announcement of a couple more partnerships. So first off, Hitachi has let us. We've been working with them for quite some time, but now they've actually come to the point where they're working on a prototype system that will have either 12 or 24 drives. This is under development. This is actually a little kind of interesting because this is not typical of Hitachi to come out and announce products. But I think what it says is that there's this wave of products that's coming. It's time for everyone to kind of join in the momentum to let you know what's coming. So Hitachi's a great partner, and we're expecting some very interesting things later this year from these systems. And finally, last but not least, IBM is working on a system. They're being closer with the specifics of it, but just let you know that it's basically a cluster-in-a-box targeted system that will also be coming later this year. So an interesting range of partnerships, both products that have been completed since we last talked, and a bunch of products coming out on the show floor. So the question is, great, is that it? No. There is more. There's a few products that are actually launching with availability at the show this week. First, LSI is launching their Synchro CS product, and this is basically high availability in a hardware RAID controller. So this is them bringing their industry standard, industry leading Mega RAID product and doing what it needs to make it clusterable. So launching this week. This has been a long partnership we've had with them to bring just the right technology to market to meet all of these goals. So what I want to do is say, definitely stop by the LSI booth to check it out, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what this means. It's a component. It's a controller card. So why is it special? Where does it fit? So where this fits in is, if you look at the sample system diagram that I showed before, this is where the storage controller lies. So where you might have for storage spaces SAS controllers that are cross-connected to hook up direct attached storage to both nodes, the LSI Synchro CS card fits there as a hardware RAID solution. It brings a different feature set. It brings what you would expect and what probably are familiar with in terms of their product. If some of you went to their session yesterday morning, Greg Huff, their CTO, talked a little bit about the technology behind it. What I talk about here is kind of the requirements from Windows that they had to meet to bring this to market. So what's special? We've had cluster RAID controllers in the past. What's different about this? Well, what I've listed here are the set of new requirements that we had to put together to make a clustered RAID controller work well in this story of availability. Because we had to basically ensure that we were satisfying not just the technology layer, but ultimately what our customers were asking for. And remember, our customers were not asking for some new technology. We didn't get a bunch of requests from 6,000 different customer interviews that said, you know, here's a list of things we'd like to see fixed in Windows failover clustering. We didn't get a list of things saying, you know, I wish I could use this certain RAID controller because that's a technology I like to use. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to give them available business applications and available data. So what this did is it allowed, basically, we had to ensure that a card like this could work with the new version of clustering, as well as could support a failover in seconds. We had to worry a lot in 2012 about how many seconds it took to fail over if we were to ensure that a line of business application wouldn't fail, if a storage connection wouldn't fail. So we have very tight requirements on what we need from our storage subsystems. In this case, a 5-second requirement that all of the LUNs that it supports are able to move over to a surviving node in case of a failure. These are not easy things to meet, and so that's why it's a very interesting product to come out and support the new cluster-in-a-box systems. And I think it's actually going to be a foundation for a lot of systems to come, as you'll see rolling out for the rest of this year. Great. Anything else? Well, yes. There is, in fact, something very interesting that actually was announced just yesterday. In fact, this is the reason why, if you were looking for this deck, if you happen to be curious, and were looking for this deck on Monday when all the rest of the decks were released, you wouldn't have found it. And the reason is, it contains slides like this. So yesterday, Dell announced their version of a cluster-in-a-box. It's called the PowerEdge Vertex. And definitely encourage you to stop by the Dell booth to take a look at it. And the key thing about it has a lot of interesting characteristics, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later in terms of the customer focus. But in terms of the platform itself, this supports up to 4 nodes, which is a really great sweet spot, we think, for a Hyper-V appliance in terms of supporting VMs as well as management workloads and having sufficient redundancy to be able to continue to run a business in the case of a blade failure. But also, the bottom line is really interesting. This actually meets the bar of office-level acoustics and power. So this actually is making a foray into that extended market I talked about earlier, where if you really want to have a small business with a system under a desk, this is a system that could actually pull that off. So it's a very interesting entry. I think it teaches us a lot about what can happen if you really focus on a customer solution to bring a full system to market. So all in all, if you take a look at the rollout of systems, this is the modern version of this slide. So I've updated the slide I had from last year about the kinds of systems and kinds of names. So if you take a look there, I challenge anyone to say that there isn't some vendor up there that you haven't dealt with in the past that maybe could provide you a solution. So this is the rollout that's happening now, today, and for the rest of this year. And so it goes to the question, if our vision is to provide you availability wherever you buy a server, I think that a lot of you will be able to find something to make your businesses available. So I think it's quite a rollout, a lot of work done by our partners. So, hey, this is a big rollout. This is great. So I want you to, yeah, there it is, it's worth a clap. That's a lot of hardware. Now what I'd like to do is actually highlight a few of these things. We have a table up here. Don't worry if you're in the back, we actually have a camera set up, which I hit this button. Should now light up on the screen. There we are. So let me go down and actually show you a few of these boxes that were brought in by our partners. First off, right here, this is the LSI Synchro CS controller card. So you can see here, I'll hold it up and you can kind of zoom in on the particulars. Yeah, guess what? It's a controller card. It's a RAID controller card. That's actually one of the features about it. One of the key differentiators of this is, in fact, the stuff you don't have to learn. If you use RAID in a server system today, there's a very high probability you're using LSI, which is one of the reasons why a partnership with this company was so important to us. So this is the hardware you're used to. What did they have to do? They had to meet all those requirements I showed you up on the screen to make a cluster. They've done that. They've now announced the product and they're launching it. Stop by their booth and check out the details for it. This is the card here. This is the product. So I think this is again the enabler for a lot of systems to come. Next up, there's a kind of a category that's interesting of systems that are coming out in flash storage, high-end performance. This is a system from Violin, their VM6000 that they're announcing at TechEd. As you'll see, this is a very interesting box. In fact, you won't find a standard drive of any kind inside here. Violin Memory's key differentiation is their flash fabric. They've actually reinvented the deployment of flash inside of a server and have created an amazing system that's capable of scalable, very high performance transactions on purpose-built flash. So what's interesting here is they did the right thing and they didn't reinvent the server. It turns out the controllers they were using were, guess what, like a lot of controllers in boxes these days, capable of running a standard server workload. So what they were able to do is take Windows Storage Server, put it on the controllers that they use to run the box, and now have a Windows Storage Server, full flash, high-end enterprise solution. So a very interesting focus on a high-end market using Windows Storage Server 2012 software to bring it to life. Let me skip over this interesting box here and go over here. Oop, and get it out from under the speaker. Over here on this side, actually, if you can pan in closely, the system itself is inside the rack enclosure. This is another flash, all-flash solution, this time taking a different approach. This is S-Tech, and they announced at TechEd this week a system that uses their SSD drives, which is their technology that they're really known for as far as leaders in the industry. Put it in a purpose-built system running Windows Storage Server to deliver a full file server solution. So it's another example where you have an interesting technology. In this case, leading-edge SSDs, enterprise-class performance, a lot of interesting technology they bring to bear as far as the ability to use, MLC and get enterprise kind of a quality out of it. But what the market demands these days is a solution. They really are looking for something they can deliver, and so what we were able to enable with Windows Storage Server is to allow S-Tech to bundle this with some industry standard server technology and bring out a Windows Storage Server based on their key technology of the SSDs. So another interesting application for customers. And then finally, quickly by the speaker, let me show you this one. This is just left over. If you stopped by their booth on Monday, you would have seen this covered in interesting interesting silver cloth. This just debuted. So this system is the PowerEdge Vertex from Dell. And one of the key things actually you can notice about it first is that it's standing in a tower config. It goes to the office acoustics and office power that allows this system to hopefully enter the market in businesses that up till now would never have looked at such a powerful box. Let me actually come around to the front side and point out a few things here. One of the interesting things they did, one of the comments we get back about saying, hey, you're bringing out this cluster in a box. I've heard that's like an appliance thing, right? And don't appliances lock you in to a certain level of technology? These are custom-built blades and servers that, do they keep pace with it? Am I going to be kind of stuck when I buy an appliance? So they did a very clever thing, is they only reinvented the part that required the cluster availability to be simple. So the whole chassis is a very interesting design. Quiet fans, things that allow it to use office power. But they use their standard blades for the compute, and they use their standard drives for the storage. So what they've done is they put together a system here that basically can be built even out of blades that you already have that meet these specs, and put together a system that then can be used as a virtualization appliance. So it's an interesting, very interesting and clever design. I think it's going to open up some interesting new markets. So definitely take a look at what's coming. Okay, so that's our hardware highlight. What I'd like to talk about now is great. It's nice to see some hardware on board. It's nice to see that I can actually purchase these things. But the question now is anybody actually using this stuff? Am I going to be the first one to market? So put together some information about the customer angle to these systems. Customers that are using them, as well as another interesting thing, like I mentioned here about the Dell system, the Violin system, S-Tech, is these systems are now being designed with the customer scenario in mind. We're moving beyond the point where server companies are simply producing hardware and offering them up for usage. They're actually starting to focus on what the end customer is going to be doing with it, and tuning not just the hardware itself, but also the delivery, the solution, even the overall application sets to match that. So let's check this out. So first, I'd like to introduce a case study of a company, EdgeNet. Now, you might have heard, if you were listening carefully during the keynote on Monday, you heard Brad Anderson mention EdgeNet, and what he mentioned was that they're doing a very interesting application of in-memory database technology, where they can actually update inventories real time without having to take a database down and re-indexing for hours. So the kind of thing, for example, where if you're looking to buy a power saw at Home Depot, and you click on the in stock and it shows you 6 power saws, you might actually have a chance that there actually are pick 6 power saws, and that wasn't sold off earlier in the afternoon. So very practical aspects of this. But another angle that this company is taking on is also the idea that you can do better with the hardware you have inside your deployments. But rather than let me just go on about and explain it directly, rather just play you a video. Michael Steinecke, their VP of IT, does a great job, I think, of explaining how this works. So let's just listen.
Company. We've been moving most of our software to software as a service over the last few years. We support large enterprise customers like Home Depot, Lowe's, and AutoZone. The software and services we host for our customers help them sell more. We have complex configurator applications, guides that help sales associates find the right product for their customers, as well as design solutions to help customers build complex outdoor projects. EdgeNet has 3 offices, Milwaukee, Nashville, and Atlanta, and we've been able to take development systems, test systems, and put those all in our data center. But we still need to have infrastructure in our local office to help support those users.
Here in the Nashville office, we work with manufacturers to help them categorize their data in such a way that we can then plug that into our configurator software to enable consumers to configure highly complex items such as windows, doors, anything that has a high rate of error or complexity. By deploying the Quanta CIB and the Synchro CS storage solution, we're able to reduce our requirements from a 10U format to a 2U format. We're able to reduce our power overhead requirements, our cooling requirements, and our space utilization requirements.
Simplicity was key in looking for a solution for my branch offices. When I heard about the Cluster-in-a-Box program from Microsoft, I was able to partner with them to become one of the first testers of the Cluster-in-a-Box system. With their out-of-box experience, or UBI, you're able to set up a cluster without knowing anything about Windows clustering and have the system up and running in a matter of minutes. The other great thing for the Cluster-in-a-Box is to scale out file server storage target, or SMB. Using the Cluster-in-a-Box as an SMB storage target helps you leverage the LSI Synchro controller's high-speed storage capabilities to give you low-cost, high-speed storage you can target towards certain hypervisors. So if you have something that needs high-speed storage, you can have that very low cost with the cluster in a box with the LSI Synchro cards. With our current configuration, my network engineers need to know how to manage a SAN, zone fiber channel switches, as well as work with the operating system on a 2-server cluster. With Cluster in a Box, they really only have to worry about the 2-server cluster and can spend the rest of their time working on other things and supporting our software engineers and customers better. With Cluster in a Box, I've been able to remove all the complexity of having fiber channel and a SAN. Using the Cluster in a Box with the LSI Synchro card with shared storage, it's given me greater performance and greater manageability and less cost.
Great. Actually, Michael, are you here? Did you make it? I was trying to wonder if you actually made it. Well, just let's give a hand for Michael, willing to have his face. Not everyone. It takes a little bit of courage to have your face 10 feet tall in front of a large crowd of people. So appreciate that. So let me explain a little bit more about the EdgeNet application, because I think it has a lot of kind of general applicability. One of the things about them is they're an interesting business. They're kind of a new kind of business where they actually run their value is based on the ability to present data in useful ways. And so they gather lots of data, store it, write custom software to deal with, to parse it out and turn it into things that you use probably every day. Things like if you go onto websites like Home Depot and look at stock and figure out the right set of brackets to buy, all of that is the kind of thing they power. One of the interesting things about them is even though they're a small business, they represent kind of the reality of businesses today. They have 3 offices, kind of a headquarters as well as 2 branch offices. So they're distributed, which means that their workloads, they have some branch office requirements. They run different workloads in different offices, and they have to support equipment and hardware in multiple offices. So it's key for them to be able to not only consolidate their workloads to keep it simple, but also reduce cost, because they have several different setups they have to support, across a region of the United States here. So some specifics on what they did is this workload listed here is kind of typical of what you might expect. It's a little bit of the kind of the housekeeping kinds of things for different servers, as well as some of the stuff specific for their business, such as development tools to let them create the the data parsing and as well as front ends that they use for their own business. So all of that stuff running on this existing implementation, which you can read here. It says this is very typical of what you would expect a high availability to mean. Before Cluster in a Box. So what they're able to do is now replace all of that with a single system and run basically their entire workload on it, use it as either a storage system or indeed kind of a branch in a box to let them run their full workload. So it's a great example of kind of the benefits you get if you are looking to upgrade your hardware. Have an existing installation. Perhaps you have high availability, perhaps you don't. What you thought about what it took to get this into your business is changing. And that's probably one of the key messages here, is that this is the kind of thing that you really should look at to see what direction you're going to take to bring availability to your operation. So that's a great customer case. What I want to talk about now is this concept I mentioned before about server companies moving beyond producing some hardware platforms and actually now targeting their systems to specific customers. So when part of the conversation we had with our partners for Cluster in a Box was the idea that if you're producing a volume product, you really need to think about how your customers are using it. For a volume product, you really need to tailor something that matches the customer's needs and is useful as fast as possible. Because when people are trying to deploy and they don't have significant IT resources or expertise, they can't afford a lot of consulting, they really can only afford, in some sense, the equipment they're buying. You have to understand what the requirements are and get as close to them as you possibly can. So in this case, there's two different types of scenarios that we focused on. While we think ultimately availability, like other technologies, should fold and disappear into the system, you first have to think about, well, what are the kind of the killer apps for this? So the top 2 are similar. They're kind of the everything in a box scenarios. So these are Hyper-V appliances. They'd be running Windows Server and running basically Hyper-V guest VMs for the workloads. And you can see sort of the profile across them. The typical common to this genre is that it's either a small business that really has no or only part-time IT expertise, or in fact, a lot of them actually depend on their VAR to help them out to get systems running, or a branch in a box where there might be expertise at the headquarters, but in today's day and age, they're undoubtedly very highly leveraged, as they would say. Run ragged is another way to put it. While you might think about deploying availability across your branch offices, it's again, simplicity and ease of management is key. So all of those aspects belong to the top categories. And you can see some of the examples, whether these are dentist offices, doctor's offices, lawyers, design, product design houses. They all fit this kind of profile of needing some interesting workload compute, some connectivity, but they want to keep it as simple as possible. Now, the bottom category is different. And while it's the same hardware fundamentally, in fact, the difference is really amounted to the configuration. Remember that component slide, the guidelines slide I showed you earlier? A little bit different CPU, memory configuration, network card kind of things to think about. It is built on the same platform. So this is basically high availability NAS. And this application, we think, is different. It has a different profile, finds its way into different kinds of businesses. But this is also a key market for availability in a volume way. And so you can even see from the range of products I've already talked about that are coming out, they kind of fall in different camps. There's a whole set of storage server kind of applications. There's Hyper-V general purpose appliance kind of applications. And then some companies that are actually offering both, a lot of it based on the same hardware. So it kind of goes to this idea, well, this is more than just offering availability. This is now actually starting to look at it as really what's the future of the server. And if availability is in there, which is demanded by the customer base, what are the kinds of systems that are going to be coming out? And that's why we think this really is an important wave. Okay, so if those are, I wanted to show a couple of examples of this in terms of how partners are targeting. So first up, a little bit more about the Dell PowerEdge Vertex system. So let me put a little spotlight on this and actually show you some of the materials that they're using to explain it to their customers. So one of the, as the previous slide showed, one of the key conversations we had with all the partners was really understand your customers. Get close to them, because to really sell a volume availability solution, you're going to have to configure it for them. And to do that, you have to know what you're configuring it for. So in this example, you can see Dell went out of their way to really understand the different market categories. Everything from branch offices to specific applications such as government, retail, hospitality, education. These are actually, while they're similar in the needs as far as simplicity, availability, the specific close solution needs are different. The market is different. Their hotspots as far as what they're looking for are different. And a few examples as far as the kinds of the depth that Dell as a partner is going to understand their market is targeting actually different categories and looking what actually separates them out. So this is really cool, I think, because it goes beyond, it goes one level deeper than simply understanding, okay, it needs to be simple. It needs to be, we understand the basic guidelines about the box. This actually starts to look at the customers themselves. Small businesses, healthcare, the kinds of things that healthcare worries about, compliance, specific utilities, working with specific VARs. This is pretty cool. A couple of other examples. Retail, they need point of sale systems. They might be some of the more demanding when it comes to the environment of the box itself. Branch offices, different requirements for mobile connectivity, different requirements for administration. Being able to see where your systems are and being able to monitor them, for example, on a central office. Different applications like that Dell is actually bringing to the solution. So I think it's a really great example of what it takes these days to not only provide technology, which actually, just an aside here, in the back of your mind, you might be thinking, okay, I've heard this, and John's saying a lot of interesting things, but is this really new? I've heard about cluster in a box, I think 10 years ago from somebody or other. And the interesting thing about that is you're absolutely right. A number of attempts at this have been made, especially even as more than 10 years ago, by big names, by some of the same companies actually that are on the partner slide. A lot of those projects didn't work. In fact, I would claim none of them worked. And I think the reason is, in fact, we kind of know the reason, is because what they were doing was doing a lot of work to provide a foundation, a piece of hardware that was able to be used in a highly available way. What they missed was delivering a full solution that was easily installable, affordable, maintainable by a volume of businesses. So what we have here is modern technology, some really clever thinking, for example, in the Vertex system about usability, about placement, some really clever thinking, for example, in the flash storage from Violin and S-Tech about the reasons to use their high-performance storage solutions. And what we have is now partners that are pulling this together and actually figuring out all the way to the end how it's being used. So I think this is a key thing. I think it'll benefit in this audience basically, or the customer base in some sense for these kinds of boxes. And I think what you can look for is targeted solutions to your area. And I think one of the things I'm looking forward to is getting more case study information to show you businesses like yourself that will be applying these to their problems. One other spotlight I wanted to give is actually to highlight these kinds of systems here. This is a technology, flash storage, known for high performance, basically extremely low latency kind of solutions. But we have here, though, are a couple of solutions, and in each, what I highlighted here was in the information that these partners are showing to their customers and partners. They're now targeting specific lines of businesses, use cases for customers. So in this case, for example, for Violin, you can see here while they have an incredible story to tell as far as the solution they've created for world-class performance flash storage for enterprise, they're going beyond that and actually talking about the specific kinds of customers that will make use of it. And thinking about the solution that needs to be delivered of this, rather than just simply saying, great, it's highly available, incredibly fast storage. Do you want it? They're actually understanding who would want it and taking it to the next step and figuring out how to get the messaging out to these specific customers. Another example in the same area is the system on the end here from S-Tech. Again, this is a company that is known for leading edge SSD implementation of flash storage. But what they're doing here is saying, well, that's not really a solution. They could either depend on partners to try and bring this to market, or instead they took the extra step and created the solution themselves. And what this allows them to do is now focus directly on the customer. So it gets them out of the mode of basically producing this foundation platform of hardware, and now they can start to target with this product specific customers, understand their needs, and address them in a product that they can deliver directly to the end user. So this is a turn, I think, that's happening more and more in servers, and probably, I think, the best explanation for why, if you heard of a cluster-in-a-box product, or heaven forbid, you might have been involved in the creation of such a thing 10 years ago, why this is different. Because it's different in the sense that the market is different, and the kind of work that had to be done was really, in many cases, although some incredible work was done for technology, it was as much about the tailoring of the solutions to the ease of use and end customer scenarios as it was about the specific hardware and bits that we had to both do together to create these boxes. Okay, so with that, now I'd like to get to the kind of the last section here, which is, well, great. Is anything new happening in R2? So, and of course, the thing I can tell you is, you betcha. If you think about it, it's really been just a year. It's been 1 year ago at TechEd, we were launching Windows Server 2012. So when we talk about what's new in something like this with these kinds of hardware products, it basically needs to start out with something like this. First off, we realized that while we were able to create an amazing set of features, in fact, one interesting thing is, so you guys have probably attended a lot of sessions so far, a lot of them even about the R2 content. How many people would agree that this is not a service pack release? Yes? Oh, come on. You've seen some amazing stuff. This is not a service pack release. We've taken a lot of the foundation that we built in 2012 and really built on it in some amazing ways. And I'll actually talk specifically about some of the storage spaces work in particular as it applies to cluster-in-a-box in a second. But one of the messages I want to get across is, but we also understand you can move software bits pretty quickly. Hardware takes some time. And to build a system like this and to bring it to market, it's a big investment. And not only is it a big investment from the server partners themselves, but if you're going to be looking at hardware yourself and purchasing it and taking it on, this is not the kind of thing you can change in 12 months. So what we've done is we basically said, okay, we are not changing the requirements for the hardware. These same systems that have been developed for the rollout for 2012 are absolutely the right systems for R2. And we're actually letting the customer base know that what you need to look for are the systems rolling out today. They might come in some new configurations, and I'll get into that in just a couple of slides. But fundamentally, the hardware is a foundation just like Windows Server 2012 was a foundation, and we're not looking to change that. So it takes a while to get a wave of server because unlike the latest tablet computer, this is not something, when you're buying your equipment, this is not something you assume you're going to throw away in maybe 8 months when the new thing comes out. This is an investment. It takes some time to get used to it and understand how it's going to fit, and we understand that. So with that, however, I want to talk about the existing scenarios and some of the things that are happening in R2. So if you've been attending some of the sessions, you might have caught wind of some of the things that are actually very interesting when it comes to clusters and availability. So the same scenarios, everything in a box and storage, there's a couple of things going into R2 that are actually applicable to both. So one, we're supporting the fast initialization experience with 4 nodes in the box. This is this out-of-box experience. It actually is think of it though as not just a feature, it's a partnership. This is a fully customizable experience that a partner can come in and fully customize. It's XML-based. It lets you go through, and we do all the work of talking to the different systems. It lets you configure it from one screen. The partner can configure it to add information, simplify the flow, do lots of things. And so 4 nodes is now standard support for that in R2. The other interesting thing is storage spaces. So this is our in-box modern storage virtualization feature set. So this came out and debuted with Windows Server 2012, and they've done some interesting things that I'll talk about in the next slide. There's a lot of other pieces that just make these things better. So listed here are a few examples. Scale out just is better. Performance on file sharing with SMB3 is just better. We're learning how to take advantage of some of the scaffolding that we put in place in 2012 and use it to improve these scenarios. Instead of, for example, waiting for a failover to happen before we move a connection, we can use the same scaffolding to move a connection proactively if we think we can balance the load. Some great stuff happening. Same hardware, same market, just makes it better. But we think there'll be some new configurations that'll be available, and let me take a few minutes to go into detail there. So storage spaces has, I think, addressed a really interesting area. One of the biggest requests that received from partners designing a box, a cluster in a box, especially for storage that use spaces was, it's great that it's clusterable, but the limitation that you can't support a parity space in clustering is really huge. Wouldn't it be, can't you guys simply support the equivalent of some kind of RAID 5 to get my disk utilization up? And wouldn't that be great? The other most common ask that came from partners was, do you do anything special with solid state? Can you handle some, can you leverage SSDs in this configuration? That would really be great. Well, if you've been attending, looking at some of the sessions, and there's actually some other ones going on, I'll show them at the end. The answer to both of these is yes, it's happening. So while we had those limitations in 2012, we now, in clustered configuration with R2, they now support a parity space, and they now are able to leverage SSDs. So this is great. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see some partners that have existing configurations qualifying on R2, and you'll see those available. I think also what will happen is some of the players that, not even on that slide yet, that were thinking about entering the market but were limited by the cost and the efficiency, are going to think about it again. And I think you'll see even more solutions coming out based on this. But first, I think the other thing we often get with this kind of thing is, yeah, great. It all sounds wonderful, but can you give me some example? What are we really talking about? So what we did is, in preparation for TechEd, with the bits that are going into the preview release, we did some measurements, set up some specific systems. So should be enough information in these slides to actually, if you get a hold of the preview, to do some setup of your own. So what we did is decided, okay, the most common things that partners should be looking at will be an entry-level SKU, all hard disk drives, and then optimized for capacity. And the second configuration would be something more, we call, I think Spaces is calling a balanced config, something that takes advantage of some solid-state disk drives, flash storage that are added to the system. So in this case, what we did is we looked at all HDD configurations. So picked a couple of typical things. Often these systems have 12 or 24 drives, either built in or with an additional shelf of disks added. We set up some parity spaces and a clustered config. You can see here that what we did by choosing the configuration we did, which was 8 columns. A column is kind of like a disk drive in Spaces parlance. By choosing 8 column parity spaces, we were able to get basically move the efficiency, the utilization, effective capacity of the data drives from 50% from the previous release of Mirrored to 87% effective capacity because they're now using basically an 8-way parity space. So what we did is we actually set this up, put it on a Quanta Mesos system, put together enough information here just using standard, using drives. And what we did here is we found, okay, it looks like it does what you want. This is optimized for capacity, not numbers that blow you away, but basically functional, working parity spaces. What we're assuming here is that you'll give this a try and see how it goes yourself. One of the things about these numbers is we basically, a lot of the times you'll see numbers that have been worked on and refined and polished to the nth level to get the ultimate number that you will never see if you put together a box, guaranteed. What we did here is we did something different. We actually put these systems together, set them up, got them working, ran some simple SQLi workloads, and just saw what happened. So these basically are the numbers that just kind of happened. So we tried to be as real world as we could, saying, okay, for example, you can see sequential writes, nothing special going on there at all. You can get that number up. In fact, we've done other work that says, well, if you increase the queue depth and put up with some latency that goes into a little bit, stretches longer than just a few milliseconds, that number can double easily. Decided not to go there. Decided, no, we really want to present the kinds of configurations and the kinds of results that you would see yourself and you could put together yourself. So the encouragement is to take a look at this, try it out. A lot of times your own workload is really what tells the difference in terms of what kinds of technology meets your bar. So that's interesting, but then we decide, okay, the next one, the balanced config. So what we want to do there is we want to say, great, if you add some SSDs, invest in a little bit of SAS SSD technology, what does it do for you? So in this case, we basically added 2 SAS SSDs to the mix. Notice that we basically kept to the same 12 and 24 drive, assuming the same shelf capacity of the cluster in a box or cluster in a box plus a JBOD. And added 2 SSDs to the pool and configured that to be used as the write-back cache or journal for Spaces configuration. So what this does is this is not going to the tiering level where you're actually doing placement. This is actually really just leveraging the SSD as the fast place to dump data that later then is mapped into the data store drives. So you can see here we added this. Here's the configuration we ended up with. The thing that jumps out is that it does what you might think it might do. The random writes, here we 8K random writes coming at it, increased by basically a factor of 8. So this is because it's now able to use the SSDs to do the full stripe updates and the read modify writes and take advantage of that kind of performance. You can see the sequential numbers we might actually a little bit lower because, okay, you only have 10 spindles really running, serving as your data drives versus 12. But we think actually looking at some of the numbers, of kind of RAID cards, this gets you in the competitive range. So again, numbers that we didn't go to a great length to polish. These are actually numbers we expect if you set up this system, you should be able to duplicate without a lot of tuning and a lot of help. The encouragement here is to give it a try. Set it up or look for some of the systems coming out from our partners that will likely come in these kinds of SKUs and configs. Okay, so that's an interesting highlight for R2. The key thing now is to take a look and say, okay, great, what do we want you to do? Where do you go from here? So as far as going from here, the key thing is take a look. So the message to you, the customer base, is think about availability. The standard question to challenge you with is, why isn't everything you're doing highly available? What's in the way? We think we've done an amazing amount. We think the partners have done an amazing amount of work to make these systems available, ready for the market for your kind of businesses. So take a look. Understand your business, especially as you start planning buying cycles, and think about where the future of on-premise servers are going. And think about how you're going to match up with cloud deployments and the kind of expectations of your customer base. It really makes a lot of sense to check these kinds of things out. Grab the preview release, give it a spin yourself. I've given you the information about how you can, enough information to set up your own version of a Spaces config. You should be able to see what kind of numbers you get, how it plays against your workloads. And then finally, feedback. We'd love to learn more about it, both positive and negative. We'd love to get some case study information happening. So jlevel@microsoft.com. I'd love to see what you're doing and find out more about kind of how you're applying this to your business. Finally, I'll show, I have a few informational slides. So I put links together for every partner that I mentioned here. So these are the links. A lot of them actually are specifically to the products that they were looking at. So this is in the deck. You can get it from Channel 9 afterwards, and you can check out some information yourself. Again, this is what it means to have released equipment. You can actually give public URLs to go find out more about it. Yay. And finally, at the bottom, there's some information about how to hook up with both EdgeNet and Microsoft as far as getting in touch with us, learning more about how we're dealing with the solutions and qualifying them and certifying them. I'll show, I have some information about related sessions. This is a platform in some sense that uses Windows Server. All the features of R2 are important, so I'll have a slide to list that. The other thing I'll call out is say, please give feedback. Please register that it's our best way to figure out whether or not we're giving you what you need. So please do that. We love to make sure that we're giving you everything you want from TechEd. But finally, and I couldn't help myself, I had to bring back that previous slide. Basically, so the biggest question I've been getting for the last year was, hey, great, wonderful stuff, where can I buy it? And so I think if you take a look at the list of systems that are available today, and from the names that you have on the list that you can talk to, big names, small names, Hyper-V virtualization servers to storage servers, high-end, low-end, high-density, entry-level configs, I think it's fair to say that we really are right now building this vision of availability wherever you buy a server. So big hand to our partners that brought up the solution, and I basically challenged you. Why are you not making availability part of everything you do in your business? Thanks.